Hey guys, this is a video for my Patreon supporters, so thanks again for supporting me on Patreon, and this is your extra video. I believe this should be the third extra video of the month, probably the final one of this month. And so I've been making videos about this Chinese Dao, and I just wanted to say a few more things about it that I wouldn't necessarily say on my public facing videos. The first thing to say is I have actually seen quite a lot of these over the years, and since I got this one I've been looking online at others, and the one thing which really strikes you about these Chinese swords is they are crap. And by that I mean they're really very clearly churned out, mass-produced rubbish quality, the blade on this is relatively soft. It was a bit bent when it came to me. I straightened it very easily. It's got no temper. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're dealing with fairly bad quality steel, it's better to use softer steel and not heat treat it than to try and heat treat it and then have a brittle blade, because clearly it's better if you've got a great big sharp clump of iron, frankly like a lot of tools are, you know, like a bill hook for example. Lots of them are just sharpen up bit of iron. At least you know it will do its job, and if you do a bad cut or you hit something hard, it will bend, and if it bends you straighten it. It's simple solution. It's what they did in the Iron Age, and you know, the Romans, I think Tacitus talks about the Celts standing on their swords to straighten them. Once it's straight, it still works again, but if it breaks, it doesn't really work. You might have a bit of blade you can use to jab in someone's neck or something, but generally speaking, it's better if a blade bends than breaks, in my opinion, and I think lots of other people's. So the first thing to say about these Chinese mass-produced swords of the late 19th century is they are not good quality, although they are functional. And you know, what I was thinking about the fact that this is essentially like it's essentially a sort of giant cleaver, and actually if you've got a peasant levy, I suppose it could quite easily go into the fantasy mindset. We say, what would we arm Urukai with? What would we arm goblins with? And yeah, I guess, and this is not being culturally insensitive. I am not likening, you know, Chinese boxers of the Boxer Rebellion to goblins. I'm not, but I'm just saying if you've got untrained, low skill level, but probably quite strong, fierce levies, essentially, to throw in waves at the enemy, what do you give them? Absolutely, you give them really sensible, unbreakable, sharp cleavers. You know, hatchets, machetes, this kind of thing, and dowels of this type. And I would also reiterate, there are dowels, even from this period, which are of absolutely superb quality, but this is not one. So everything about it is rough. Even the wood, the way that the wood's carved is pretty rough on the tang. The way it's bound on, it's not, you know, fantastically well fitted. The pommel and the guard are, as you can see, the guard is loose. The hole, which is made through the guard, is too big for the tang, so the guard kind of jangles around. Maybe it didn't originally, maybe it's got loose with age as the wood has shrunk on the grip. The pommel cap is made in two halves, and I think forge welded up the centre, like a kind of cup, and peened at the end, and it's fairly rough. The blade geometry is bad. Even if you sharpened this, if you spent a whole weekend sharpening this, it is not going to cut well. It will certainly go into someone's head and kill them, but you are not going to be cutting water bottles very well with this at all. It is a thick, chunky, badly formed edge. These are churned out, mass-produced, but as a historical artifact, it's still incredibly fascinating, and we must remember that a huge proportion of the weapons made throughout history have been of this kind of quality, have been mass-produced crap. And it would have been no different in medieval Europe, it was no different in Renaissance Europe, and it was to some extent no different really, although industrialisation helped, but it was no different really in Napoleonic Wars Europe. A lot of the so-called cabbage cutters and other sidearms, the briquette and things like this, that were given out to French soldiers as sidearms, were of absolute crap quality. In fact, I've had some, and again, they're untempered pieces of crap, really, but they're good enough to do the job that they were intended for. And you know, someone mentioned that these were predominantly used for chopping up wood. Ironically, I think this would actually make a fairly bad wood chopper because it's kind of too cumbersome. It'd be quicker to do it with a machete or a hatchet. Yeah, really, just to say that the Chinese Dao of this particular example is not a good quality weapon, but it didn't really need to be. And it's better to equip 10,000 troops with crap Daos than only equip 1,000 troops with really good quality Daos. Because at the end of the day, how many swords actually got used? Most people were shooting arrows or bullets. Most people were getting killed by arrows or bullets. The people that used swords to actually slay enemies were probably usually in a minority, and most people who carried swords never got to use them on the opponents. They are sidearms, secondary weapons for the most part. So there we go. Talking a little bit more about the Chinese Dao, I do hope that in the future I will get a good quality Chinese sword, and I'm actually looking around at the moment. Because having this one, which came to me in an auction with some other things, but having this one has piqued my interest. And I've been learning a little bit more. I'm by no means an expert, but I've been learning a little bit more about Chinese weapons. I used to practice Kung Fu, incidentally, before I did HEMA many years ago, so I have an interest in Chinese martial arts. I have Chinese students in my club who are doing HEMA, but I also have an interest in the revival of traditional Chinese swordsmanship as well. So it's all interesting stuff to me, and I very much would like to lay my hands on some better quality Chinese weapons. But nevertheless, this was probably part of the Boxer Rebellion, and it is an interesting historical artifact, and reminds you that just because a sword is a sword doesn't mean that it's a high status weapon or good quality. Many swords, the majority of swords made in history, were really metallurgically pieces of crap that were just designed to do one job by very lowly trained people, and probably never got to do that job because most people carry these as sidearms and either died or never killed anyone. So it's all about context again, and it's really, I think this is a brilliant weapon to remind you of the context that swords have played, and the many different contexts that the swords have played in the history of warfare. Cheers folks.